A piece of art which has defined its time. A painter who everyone gave up on. A deed that continues to amaze people for more than a century. The Kyiv Art Gallery National Museum. Some time ago, the first Kyiv private art gallery was established in this museum. Today, this is a famous national museum that showcases various expositions that are limited not only to paintings, but also other objects of art. The masterpieces of ancient masters, Russian painters, and Ukrainian geniuses labeled as Russian artists by the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union have been delighting the eyes of the most persnickety visitors for nearly a century. An evening sunset landscape, which can only be seen in Ukraine and can only be depicted in a painting by an artist who is in love with his native Ukraine. This is a poetic, monumental, epic Ukrainian landscape. A lot of researchers say that this is a philosophic interpretation of nature and the philosophic reinterpretation of the things this artist saw. In this picture, the painter succeeded to convey the whole range of colors, the picturesque complexity of the landscape, the mood, a state of mind of people when they see twilight, a state of sadness, grief, and different kinds of recollections. This is a small painting that is no more than 29 by 57 centimeters in size. The picture is painted with oil colors on a canvas. The artist used special technique, oil painting, that was used by painters over many centuries and is used today by contemporary painters. But it doesn't make the picture simpler. The topic chosen by the artist dictates presence of sophisticated methods. This is a complex state of an aerial environment of light. It has poor lighting and it is very difficult to paint naturally because it depicts images at twilight when there is still darkness. This is a picture which demonstrates full defiance of artistic methods, which were traditional for painters of that time. One of these works, in particular Evening by Kuidzhi, shows that his method of painting is quite different from that of other artists. He is not interested in detailing and has absolutely no interest in household nuances. What textbook truisms of the time did a painter violate? What extraordinary event preceded the creation of the painting? And who preserved this piece of artwork for the Ukrainian Museum? It was 1882. The famous painter and native of the Ukrainian city of Mariupol, Arkhip Kuidzhi, refused from taking part in exhibition activity at the zenith of his fame. So the public didn't see any paintings of the master for many years. His friends and ill-wishers said that the painter sputtered out. The artist himself even didn't try to over-persuade someone, and in 1886 he bought a plot of land in Crimea. The fame this artist had already gained ensured him a comfortable life. He was a very wealthy painter. In comparison with the majority of his contemporaries, he could afford to buy an estate in Crimea. He, together with the wanderers, wanted to create a so-called creative base in Crimea. But unfortunately, they quickly renounced the idea. Nevertheless, the well-to-do Kuidzhi bought the estate. In such a way, he made it possible for himself and his family to have a rest by the sea, paint pictures, and simply enjoy all the beauty of nature. Initially, the land plot Kuidzhi bought was not fit for comfortable living. There wasn't even a dwelling, but Kuidzhi even did not wait until a house would be built there. Having dropped everything in St. Petersburg, he came to these uninhabited lands. Such a quick departure was due to another circumstance. One day Kuidzhi contracted a strange disease, but he refused from medical treatment. Soon after that, he moved to Crimea and lived in a trailer house, which he bought in Finland. It was so small that there was only space enough for one bed. Having parked the trailer on a beach by the sea, he lived in this abode for about 2 months. Kuidzhi walked around stark naked, swam in the sea, light under the sun, and engaged in his hobby. News that some wise men had settled on this territory quickly spread among the local Crimean Tatars. People were afraid to come close to his house, but nevertheless they respected the hermit, whom they assumed its inhabitant Kuidzhi was. One day, one local inhabitant came to see him. He got off a horse, came close to the house, and saw the naked Kuidzhi reading a book. As a show of respect to the wise man, he also took off his clothing and sat next to him. The man chatted until sunset. These difficult times were a real test of strength not only for Kuidzhi, but of his relations with Vera Kachurji, the daughter of a famous Mariupol merchant. She followed her husband to Crimea and lived together with him in these Spartan conditions. The family returned to St. Petersburg only at the end of the warm season in Crimea. So we may say that it was a relationship between two faithful, loving people who followed each other everywhere and supported each other. But in the period of so-called isolation, the Ukrainian of Greek origin Kuidzhi not only rested in Crimea, but he also contemplated life and worked actively. At that time, he painted a lot of pictures. Moreover, the creative research he had conducted at that time surprised those who were familiar with pictures painted by Kuidzhi in the early period of his creative work. Those were paintings in which Kuidzhi actively studied new artistic methods of Impressionists. It was exactly light and aerial effects and a combination of the aerial environment with the objects in the picture. This was some kind of etude with bright colors. Among them there is the painting Evening, which is preserved in the Kiev Art Gallery. People learned about it, as about many other of his works, only after Kuidzhi's death. Art experts called it a sketch. Apparently, this sketch was prepared especially for some unfinished painting, which was painted between 1885 and 1890. Despite that the picture was unfinished, the painter succeeded to show his great skills. Looking at it, people have conflicting sensations. Kuidzhi succeeded to do that using such conflicting and mutually exclusive approaches. On the one hand, Evening is a classical romantic composition full of dynamism, tragedy, poetics, mystery and mysticism. In short, these were all the traits that were typical for the genre. But at the same time, the painter used a realistic method and combined everything so carefully that it seems to museum visitors who look at his works as if they can touch all the objects painted in the picture with their hands. However, all the objects are very mysterious, strange and mystical. The author especially created the atmosphere of darkness in his paintings through which certain elements and objects are not clearly visible. Painting this work, the painter used not only methods of painters romanticists. Already in the 1870s, during his travels abroad, Kuidzhi became acquainted with Impressionism. The native of Mariupol got interested in this art method and started studying it. It was a really bold decision at that time, because the works of Impressionists were very highly criticized in Russia. He was actually well aware of the effects that light and aerial effects can have on a person visually. So he tried to study the Impressionist methods in order to fill his epic works with air. He studied very complex things. Specifically, he studied how an object, its shadow and space positioning depend on air vibrations, the movement of aerial masses, and the interaction of an object with those masses. The painting Evening directly demonstrated that Kuidzhi had perfectly mastered the so-called visiting card of Impressionists, namely, technique of light and aerial effects. The significance of this simple, at first glance, etude was not confined, because the challenges that the Ukrainian Greek artists faced were way ahead of their time and marked a new stage in art that began only in the early 20th century. It is Kuidzhi who was a pioneer of the establishment of this new trend in the world of art. So we can say without a doubt that he did much for the development of Ukrainian painting, and his role was as important as that of Claude Monet in the development of French painting. After all, the global solutions of the formation of an innovative method in art can be seen in his canvas, in particular in the painting Evening. The picture was preserved due to events that unfolded sometime later. 4 years after the painter finished the painting Evening, Kuidzhi became a professor and manager of a landscape workshop at the Academy of Arts. He brought his students to his Crimean estate, where they could not only enjoy the beauties of nature, but also lay in the sun, swim in the sea, and paint lots of pictures. Kuidzhi paid special attention to work based on nature. Nikolai Rerich was one of the best pupils of Kuidzhi. To some extent, he even carried on the work of his teacher. If we visually compare works by Kuidzhi of that time dedicated to Elbrus and early works by Rerich, we can see that they used the same artistic methods, in particular the combination of colors. So the methods used by Kuidzhi and his pupils considerably differ from the creative explorations carried out by the Academy of Arts. In 1901, after 20 years of silence, the painter surprised people who had already lost faith in him. Kuidzhi presented his 4 pictures to the public, and after that he again disappeared into solace. This time he remained silent to the end of his life. Kuidzhi was a rich man, so he was not a penny pincher when it came to his students and pupils. It is known that he allocated 100,000 rubles to pay for an education scholarship for his 26 students, but that was not enough for him. So, after some time in 1909, he allocated 150,000 rubles for the Society of Artists, which he himself established. Later, this society was renamed the Kuidzhi Society of Artists. This society arranged exhibitions of artists and promoted their works. The society also sent its painters to travels abroad, so that they would have the opportunity to gain valuable experience working there. The famous Mariupol inhabitant, Greek by origin and outstanding painter Arkhip Kuidzhi died on July 24, 1910. Shortly before his death, the painter left his last will and testament. He left a testament of a large sum of money to the tune of 572,000 rubles. It was huge money at that time. Kuidzhi did not write a will for his wife. He transferred this money in support of the Kuidzhi Society of Artists. His wife received only a small sum of this money. According to Kuidzhi's testament, his wife Vera got only 2,500 rubles a year. The estate, where the married couple spent their life together, was also inherited by the Kuidzhi Society of Artists. The society existed until 1930. Due to its activity, a series of paintings by Arkhip Kuidzhi, including the work Evening, have been preserved to this day. The All-Ukrainian Historical Museum sent this painting to Art Museum in 1934. In its turn, the All-Ukrainian Historical Museum received this painting as a gift from the Kuidzhi Society of Artists. Arkhip Kuidzhi played a significant role not only in the development of Ukrainian art, but also in the development of world art. His paintings are displayed in many museums all over the world and adorn private collections. One of them is the painting Red Sunset, which has over the years passed through the hands of many private collectors and finally made it into the collection of the Metropolitan Museum, which has adorned its collection since 1974. His artistic method was truly unique. If we do a detailed analysis of his paintings, we will see a lot of structural elements. At first glance, it seems that they are not combined. So we may say without a doubt, if other painters that were Kuidzhi's contemporaries tried to combine the elements as Kuidzhi succeeded in doing, they would hardly be able to do it as well as the outstanding painter did. The creative work of Kuidzhi is so unique because he succeeded to combine all the elements and create his own unique method. The practice of labeling outstanding Ukrainians as Russians has evolved over a long period of the occupation of Ukraine by Russian Empire and later by Soviet Russia. The same situation happened with the native of Mariupol, an ethnic Greek who is considered to be a representative of Russian art. Although he studied in St. Petersburg and belonged to the Russian School of Artists, Kuidzhi dedicated the majority of his works to Ukraine and got his inspiration from Ukraine, Mariupol, Odessa, and Crimea. He can be compared with the great Ukrainian poet and painter Taras Shevchenko, who studied at the St. Petersburg Art Academy and lived there for a long time. It is the city where he wrote his literary works. The great Ukrainian bard Shevchenko was also admitted to the high society of St. Petersburg. But who would dare to call Taras Shevchenko a Russian artist or poet?